Welcome, everyone, to our panel discussion celebrating 50 years of information literacy. It is so excited. We have more than 300 people here today. So it's really great to have so many folks that were interested in attending this and hearing this discussion. And hopefully we get a chance to hear from you as well as we're going forward. To briefly introduce ourselves, my name is Jane Hammonds. I'm an assistant professor in the university libraries at The Ohio State University, and I am the teaching and learning engagement librarian, and I will be acting as the moderator today. I'm going to briefly introduce all of the panelists. I'm going to give short intros, but if you are interested in seeing their longer bios, they are available on the slides at the end of the slides. So if you want to access and learn more about our panelists, you can do that by accessing those slides. So I'm so excited to be joined here today by Symphony Bruce. Symphony is the critical pedagogy librarian at the New York University Division of Libraries. Symphony believes deeply in the power of relationships and care and the ability to create powerful learning experiences for students and instructors alike. Our next panelist is Craig Gibson. Craig is a professor and professional development coordinator at the Ohio State University Libraries. He was co-chair of the ACRL Information Literacy Standards Revision Task Force that developed the framework for information literacy for higher education. And then our next panelist is Dr. Karen Kaufman. Karen is an assistant professor of instruction at the University of South Florida School of Information. She is an educator, academic, author, and researcher with a focus on information literacy and user relevance. And then we have Dr. Clarence Mabey, who is the Associate Dean for Learning and the W. Wayne Booker Endowed Chair in Information Literacy at the Purdue University Libraries and School of Information Studies. And he is the Director of the Institute for Information Literacy at Purdue. And then we have, last but definitely not least, Nicole Bukowski, who is the Curriculum and Pedagogy Librarian at the University of Arizona, specializing in library instruction programs and critical information literacy. And she is currently the elected chair for the ACRL's instruction section. So we are so excited to have all of our panelists here today. I want to thank them for being willing to give up their time to participate in this panel. And I'm really excited to hear all of their perspectives as we go forward. Just wanted to share a little bit of participant information. Everyone should have access to the chat. Please feel free to add comments and questions to the chat, respond to other participants. However, we did know that we were going to have likely a fairly large audience. So there's definitely likely that we're not really going to be able to respond directly to questions and comments posted in the chat. But please do feel free to share and comment if you would like. And due to timing issues and the number of participants we thought we were going to have, we didn't schedule a formal Q&A period, but there will be opportunities for you all to engage, you all to share. And we're also planning additional follow-up discussions at the end, which we'll share more information about at the end. We just wanted to share a little bit of guidelines as we're going forward. If you have any questions about anything as we're going forward, please do go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A. And if especially something that needs to be addressed right away, we'll try to grab those. But for the most part, as we said, we may not be able to, well, we likely will not be able to respond directly to a lot of the questions and comments in the chat. We did want to give everyone a chance, to start thinking about how we can celebrate information literacy and how we can share all of the knowledge that we have of all of the 300 plus people that are here today. So in the chat, you should see a link. I'll put that in there one more time in case folks need that. You should see a link to information literacy resources. And if you click on that link, or you use the QR code there on the screen, that should take you out to a Padlet. And that will allow you to share information literacy resources that have been really influential or relevant to you. So if there's been books, articles, videos, any other types of resources, and we'll make sure that that list is available to everyone at the end. So we thought we'd crowdsource a little bit and take this opportunity of having so many people here together to put together a really great list of resources on information literacy. So I'll go out to that Padlet really quickly there. So you can see here's what this looks like. If you haven't used Padlet before, hopefully everyone is seeing that one of my panelists, please let me know if you are not seeing the Padlet. But you can click on the little plus under each section, and that will allow you to add different resources. So we have websites, activities and lesson plans, videos, books, articles. So again, please feel free to go ahead and start adding resources on there. You can keep adding throughout the session, and then we'll make sure that this is available to everyone after, so that we all have a great list of resources to check out. Okay, hopefully we're back at the slides now. So please continue going ahead and adding your resources onto that Padlet, and then we'll go ahead and go forward. We don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but we wanted to just take a couple minutes really quickly to share some of the information literacy definitions so that we can take a look at how the definition of information literacy has evolved over time. 1974, so this is the 50th anniversary, right? The first use of the term of information literacy is generally traced back to Paul Zukowski in 1974, who stated that people trained in the application of information resources to their work can be called information literates. So now we're celebrating 50 years since the development of that term with our session today. Of course, I know that many folks are familiar with the definition from the American Library Association in 1989. Information literacy: recognize when information is needed and have the ability to locate, evaluate, and use effectively the needed information. That, of course, has been a really influential definition of information literacy. We wanted to highlight the Prague Declaration from 2003. Information literacy encompassing the knowledge of information concerns and needs, the ability to locate, identify, locate, evaluate, organize, and effectively create, use, and communicate information. And it really highlights, again, the idea of information literacy as being part of the basic human right of lifelong learning. We wanted to highlight the critical information literacy concept. This is just one definition of critical information literacy. There are, of course, other ones out there as well. We wanted to make sure that we mentioned the development of critical information literacy as a theory and practice that really looks at the socio-political dimensions of information and the production of knowledge. Critiques the way in which systems of power shape the creation, distribution, and reception of information. And then we wanted to highlight finally the framework for information literacy from the ACRL with their definition of information literacy being a set of integrated abilities encompassing the reflective discovery of information, understanding of how information is produced and valued, and the use of information in creating new knowledge. So that's a very, very quick overview of some of the key definitions of information literacy. Of course, we know there have been many other definitions that have been developed as well. We don't have time to look into all of them, but we wanted to share a little bit about how the definition of information literacy has evolved over time. And we wanted to have a chance to hear from you. So I'm going to pop a poll up really quickly. And the question is, which of the definitions sort of most aligns with your identity, your information literacy identity? So the way that you think of yourself as a teacher or a researcher or a scholar of information literacy. Which of those definitions most aligns with your information literacy identity? So we'll go ahead and pop that question up and give everyone a chance to respond. So hopefully folks are seeing that poll. We'll give folks a few seconds to respond and share your responses there. Right, so we'll try to give it another 10 seconds or so to let everyone share the response. Okay, so we've got about 80% participation. So I think we will go ahead and close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. share the results. All right, so hopefully folks are seeing the responses there. So we have about 19% connecting with that ALA definition from 1989. And then we have about 15% connecting with the Prague description, about 21% connecting with the critical information literacy definition, and then about 45% connecting with the framework definition. So really interesting to see that distribution. Interesting to see no one really connecting with that original definition going back to 1974. Great. So thank you all so much for sharing responses there. We're going to stop sharing. We're going to close that poll. And then we're going to go ahead and actually now jump into our discussion. So our first question is, thinking about the history of information literacy. For our panelists, the question is, what do you see as the key moments or inflection points in information literacy's history? So events or developments that really shape the way that we understand or practice information, continue to shape how we understand and practice information literacy, or significant markers that you see that really demonstrate the success of information literacy as a movement. So I'm going to turn it over to Craig for our initial response, and I'm going to stop sharing so that we can actually see our panelists. Go ahead, Craig.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, everybody, wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in. I'm going to start with a couple of quotes to kind of frame this. Famous professor in the School of Library and Information Science at Indiana University, David Kaiser, used to tell his students, library doesn't happen in the library. And this kind of brings up a theme that I think has run through this whole discourse about information literacy. And then a name that a lot of you will know about, Patricia Breivik, wrote that information literacy is fundamentally a learning issue, not a library issue. So I think this is something we've been dealing with for 40, 50 years, or however long many of us have been involved with this, internal, external outreach, internal discussion, self-citation, how do we think about this whole educational agenda that we're involved in? So I would suggest that information literacy history probably falls into 4 periods, and then I'm going to mention some milestones. So I would say that it got started, obviously growing out of readers advisory and reference and kind of what Lee Shulman would call a wisdom of practice. That is, practicing instruction librarians as a grassroots entrepreneurial approach began this movement, but it was very decentered and not well organized. And then we had the Zurkowsky definition, which was interesting, but something of an irony to me that a non-librarian coined the term, and then librarians picked up on it later because we were referring to bibliographic instruction, library instruction. There have been spin-offs of names, of course, for quite a long time. So then I'd say, and these are overlapping, these are not just totally sequential periods. So standards and framework developing period. So we had the information literacy competency standards. We learned that we need to write learning outcomes, that we need to assess what we're doing. And then after a time, we rethought our approach because of the variable information ecosystem, and the framework was the successor. Meta literacy fed into the formation of the framework. While all of this has been going on, I think that we had a theory building period, and that focused on a lot of research was coming from here, but also from Australia and other countries, experiential or phenomenographic research, 7 phases of information literacy, various critical theory influenced approaches. And so I think all of these are overlapping, and I think that we're now possibly at another inflection point with perhaps reinvention, thinking about artificial intelligence, thinking about civic dialogue, thinking about some of the realities of having a common shared set of facts that we can talk about in our society. So milestones. The ALA definition, of course, which was read earlier, comes from 1989. I would also mention the instruction section itself. The former bibliographic instruction section had 3 different think tanks of educational leaders of 1981, 1989, 1998. And these were convenings of leaders in the field to talk about the state of the art and what was going on and how we might move forward. Then the original Institute on Information Literacy in 1999, developed by Cerise Oberman, had 3 different parts originally. 1, the immersion program, 2, community partnerships, and then 3, best practices for information literacy programs. So those 3 of those 3, the immersion program has had, and it's coming back, I understand, the longest life in terms of professional development and for understanding ourselves as teachers and educational leaders in the field. I'd also mention all of the LOEX conferences, which bring together all of that very wonderful practitioner research. It reminds me of going to ALA and ACRL conferences and all the poster sessions and seeing all the great work, all the grassroots teaching activity that's bubbling up there that's very informative. I'd also mention the National Forum on Information Literacy that Patricia Breivik started, which was not really a librarians group, but more of an education organizations group. I know because I used to go and take the minutes. So these were very wide ranging, not library confined conversations. Related to that, I would mention all of the regional accrediting bodies like the Middle States that formally recognized information literacy. And while this was going on, the bibliographic instruction section itself renamed itself. There was a big debate about renaming, and that happened in 1995. And then very important, I think this maturation of the field is showed through the founding of the Project Information Literacy in 2008 by Allison Head. And this, many of you will know about it, of course, the Research Institute to conduct multi-institutional studies. And those research papers have been widely disseminated and form a lot of our thinking and practice today. And so I think the maturation of the field has come cumulatively out of all of these developments. There's a wealth and a rich way of thinking about information literacy that have come from all of them. And I think we need to keep that in mind. And then I would just mention more recently, the Institute for Information Literacy at Purdue, which of course Clarence has started, which is showing us some new ways of thinking about information literacy. So those are some key milestones, inflection points that I would mention. So just by way of setting some background here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Craig. Our other panelists would anyone else like to chime in on key moments or inflection points that you see?
I can add just a little bit. I definitely don't have the breadth or depth of the history as Craig does, but I just thought I would point out the shift, from the standards to the framework in thinking about assessment and moving from more discrete, what people would say easily accessible outcomes to more conceptual, and how that has changed how we might view ourselves and how we present ourselves to campus and the ways that we teach. So that's had a big impact. And a note, the framework is up for review this year, and a group is being convened very shortly for that. So we might see some changes. And then just bringing a little bit of critical information literacy in, and thinking about how that has progressed more so, I guess, a more popular interest in it in the field, starting in the early aughts. And I would say James Elmborg had a lot of
Mhm.
very important papers that came out that kind of sparked more interest in that work. Then there was some Progressive Librarians Guild publications and convening and conferences. And then I would say Maria Accardi, Emily Drabinski, and Alana Kumbier's book from 2009, Critical Library Instruction Theories and Methods, also brought a lot more interest into the field and expanded on our scholarship. So just wanted to point those out as well.
Thank you, Nicole. Clarence, I saw you unmute as well.
Sure. Well, you guys covered a really large swath, so that's excellent. I guess I would just add in a few. So Craig already mentioned, first off, I would say, Craig was involved in some of those early goings on of developing the immersion, or as I understand it, maybe you joined in the second year of it, but I think you
That's right.
helped create it. And so,
Mhm.
but I was thinking about, in research, right, with what you mentioned, like Christine Bruce and the Seven Faces. I guess I think it's interesting, like the idea that, that we're sort of always building on certain things. And sometimes we have to critique those things and dismantle them in order to sort of move on. But like, in research, I think there's sort of these key developments of, Christine Bruce and the Seven Faces, which at the time, as I understand it anyway, was sort of a alternative to the sort of more, skills-based definitions of information literacy. And suddenly she was producing this model that was sort of about how information literacy might be conceptualized by, educators, right? And so it's kind of, at the time, I think it was really throwing a spanner into the works of what people were thinking about what information literacy was, and kind of made us think about it differently. But then also, I think I would add to that list, and there's so many people, Anne-Marie Lloyd and the things that she's done in the last, decade or so, that really are kind of getting us to think about information literacy in new ways as well, thinking about the idea of the information landscape and, the idea of community of practice and stuff like that. But I would second what Nicole was talking about. For me, like James Elmborg sort of introducing those ideas around critical information literacy was really a fundamental and significant new direction. It allowed a lot of new work that was super important to, it allowed us to start thinking differently, and a lot of things came about as a result.
Great, thank you. Karen or Stephanie, did you have anything you would like to add?
I don't have much to add because I was like a literal child during most of the things that Craig talked about, which is wild to me just to hear some
That's
of
an interesting point for you to
It's true. But and I just, in thinking about the change to thinking about instruction pedagogically, thinking about information literacy pedagogically, that sort of theory building phase that Craig alluded to, I think has made a huge impact, not only in our work in libraries, but I think how other instructors, other people who teach the research process are also thinking about how they teach the research process. And so just one small anecdote is that in both of the universities where I've worked with writing studies instructors, they both know the framework. They both places have had instructors who, or entire departments who know about it, who integrate it, who borrow its language. And I think that it's just sort of a signal to how legible it is. I know there's lots of conversation about how implementable or accessible dispositions are, but I do think that it's legible to folks, and that's a triumph, I guess.
Wonderful, thanks so much. Karen, any thoughts you would like to add?
No, I think that's a great segue to the next question. So we'll just leave it there. Yeah.
Jane, could I just mention, I should have mentioned before, Carol Coulthard's research, I think was kind of formative for, it's one of the most highly cited Seeking Meaning, the book. I imagine a lot of people would know about that, but her research over decades, has had a huge influence in the field. So just wanted to mention that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And there was a comment that folks have seen in the chat that immersion is gearing back up. So Rebecca shared in the chat, discussion series engaging with the community that was published today. So please feel free to take a look at that if you are interested in immersion. And I'll just mention, I do see that a hand did come up. Unfortunately, just due to the size of the audience, I don't think that we're going to be able to allow folks to unmute and speak maybe at the end. But just I did see your hand, so I just wanted to make sure that I did acknowledge that. But please feel free to go ahead and share comments in the chat or the Q&A. So our next question is going to be focused on models or approaches for teaching information literacy. So we wanted to hear from you again on the models or approaches that you are using in your libraries. So we're going to do another poll here really quickly. So we'll launch that. We have a few different options for the sort of approaches or models that you use for teaching information literacy in your library. Hopefully you all should be seeing that. You can select multiple responses there. So please go ahead and select all that apply in your library or that you're familiar with. Lots of great responses coming in. Right, so I think that we will give it 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, now end the poll and share those results. So hopefully everyone should be seeing the results there. So we have a very high percentage of folks that are doing one-shot sessions. And then also very high number of folks that are doing online tutorials or videos or guides. About half of the folks are doing co-curricular instruction, such as workshops, for example. Then that's followed also about 45% doing embedded librarian kinds of programming. And then faculty development or teach the teachers approaches. And then the lowest percentage as the credit-bearing information literacy courses. So hopefully folks are seeing those responses there. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Thank you all for sharing there. So we'll move into our next question here. So thinking about all of these different approaches that we have tried for teaching information literacy, would anyone on the panel like to share your thoughts on those approaches or how you see librarians' role in teaching information literacy evolving as we go forward? So I'll stop sharing there. And any of our panelists would like to go first on that one? If not, I will ask Nicole if you would like to go first, and then we'll just move from there.
Sure. Yeah, so I wouldn't prescribe anything across the board about what we should be doing. It depends on the institution, who's at the institution, the needs, assessment practices. But this has been on my mind with my recent research, and I actually just did a keynote for the Big Ten Academic Alliance. Yes, that's correct. 2 weeks ago, and talked about the intersections between critical information literacy and our instruction models and librarian labor, and thinking about the effects of one-shots on burnout and how much more difficult it is to incorporate critical information literacy into a one-shot session, particularly because the philosophies of critical information literacy and critical pedagogy are more relational, and that's really hard to do in a one-shot. And of course, it's not impossible, but it's definitely, more complicated. And something that I had also brought into the keynote, in case anybody here was there, I don't, just gonna comment that I also said this there, but that I really liked Baharaki Safi's framing of the reformist approach to the one shot that she presented in her critical librarianship and pedagogy symposium. I can't even remember our acronym, the CLAPS symposium from 2022, when she was the keynote speaker. And she talked about the reformist approach in critiquing the one-shot model. And so that would imply in thinking, if a one-shot is not sufficient or effective, that then we should do 2 or more one-shots and do more labor. And so I view that as increasing the amount of labor we do. That's not to say relationships can't be built that way, or maybe there are different aspects to teaching that could be improved, but truly it's increasing the amount of sessions we're doing and thinking about that. And I'm sure everyone's aware of our budget issues currently at the University of Arizona, freezing on staffing, amount of students increasing, or even if there is the demographic cliff, the amount of instructors decreasing and the class size is growing. So there's just all these factors to think about. And is the one-shot model truly sustainable? And, seeing how many people are doing one-shots and the higher interest as well in critical information literacy. It's hard they can be like oil and water. And also thinking about critical librarianship and our sustainability and burnout and how that affects labor. So those are some things that I've been thinking about. And so I've turned in my work since maybe 2015, 2016, trying to focus more on a teach the teacher approach and working with faculty in that way. And so also for that keynote, I presented an example of some of my work that had done that, and cited, Jane, your excellent article that just came out recently in CNRL. So if anyone is not as familiar with Teach the Teacher, I highly recommend reading Jane's article that just was published. But yeah, I feel like if we're thinking about our role with faculty and thinking of ourselves more as permanent partners rather than ephemeral assistants. And so whatever that means at your institution, for whatever model workload amount that tracks to is appropriate, I think that that's the way to go. But I do think that we need to be thinking about those things because we're contending with a lot on all of our campuses. And an article as well to also to point to is Susanna Cowan's 2014 article on reconsidering who owns information literacy and just thinking about that as we work with our campuses to teach.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Thank you all as well to the folks that are sharing articles in the chat. Wonderful. Take a look at those. All right. We'll open that up to the rest of the panel. Who else would like to talk about our instruction models?
I can hop in and just say that I feel that I'm on the same wavelength as Nicole, though in my own institution, we're still doing a lot of one-shots, but that we have been doing a lot of thinking about faculty and about how, and and somebody mentioned in the chat, there has been plenty done on faculty librarian coordination, faculty librarian relationships, faculty librarians co-creating curriculum and co-creating assignments. And I really think that more of that has to happen. And I think that is one way that we make our jobs more sustainable. But there's so many of us still working in institutions where the one shot, and I hate that phrase, a single session instruction is still, the thing. And I think that we only get away from that by working with faculty, by talking with faculty, by collaborating with faculty, by forcing them to have these sort of pedagogical conversations with us about what they actually want students to know and be able to do, versus what is easy to make sure that they know and are able to do. I think it's just a really big transition that has to happen. And then on that sort of relational point, everything is unsustainable. But it does fill up my bucket to really think about consultation work, research appointments, spending one-on-one time with students, thinking about reference as instruction, And so many people have. I'm terrible with names, but all the names, all the people who write about radical reference. I think that those are also good places to put our attention.
Yeah, so I can jump in here. I was at a state college in Florida that sort of equals a community college in other places, teaching information literacy for over 10 years. So I liaised to social sciences, which is huge, business, and the health sciences. And I just want to reflect or go back a bit to one of or quote from Zurkowski, what his imagining of our future was, and I quote, information science should be directed toward establishing a major national program to achieve universal information literacy by 1984. Now, of course, we have not quite reached that point. However, what I will say is that we are seeing a maturing of information literacy since that first initial coining of the term. There's also a little bit of argument of, oh, so did he actually invent it? Or, so there's a little bit of discussion there, but either way, those who say maybe others had ideas around it, that's scholarship. That's what we do around the research and, in our information environment. So, however, what I can say as someone who has moved from a academic librarian role of teaching information literacy to an iSchool role of teaching, in the iSchool, I see a great opportunity actually for our work. So not only in training new librarians about how to teach and what to teach and when to teach and ways to do it, but also ways to collaborate, as both Symphony and Nicole noted earlier, about collaborating with faculty. How do we do that? How do we make that work a little bit more seamlessly than perhaps what we've done before? I also see in the poll a credit-bearing course being one of the smaller percentages in the reply. And what I see is opportunity. I see opportunity for us to be more intentional about building credit-bearing courses for information literacy, both in whatever institutions, wherever we are, whatever that looks like, because I also recognize that that can look very differently for many of us. But I can share an example of working with faculty to build a required credit-bearing information literacy course for a health sciences program at my previous institution. And I continue to teach it as an adjunct since I left that place. And yes, we can. It is a little tricky, but in terms of the output, the outcomes, which I think both Nicole and Symphony mentioned, outcomes measurement is what higher ed is looking to establish. And so here's a plug for ACRL Project Outcome for higher ed. And actually some colleagues and I from the University of Central Florida and I at the State College work together to say, oh, so we're doing this at the State College, and what does that look like when students end up at the university, right? And you can find that in many places. But what I'm suggesting is back to one of the earlier poll questions is our information literacy identity. Who are we? And, who are we? And I would suggest we're amazing, all of us here. And whatever you're doing, wherever it is, that we can be entrepreneurial in our way of looking at information literacy wherever we are. And again, I recognize there are many different barriers or opportunities in different places. But I'm encouraged. So yeah, so I will stop.
And maybe I could just build a little bit on what everyone has said so far. But in thinking about, I mean, I agree and recognize, and you can see people's comments in the chats, suggesting that, it's in some context, right, there's certain kinds of instruction that is prioritized or privileged, and it's hard to move away from that. What I have found in my career to be somewhat helpful around sort of having these conversations is, I think it's sort of a strategy, is thinking about like, where are teaching conversations on your campus? And so on my campus, when I came here, many years ago, there was the administration was very concerned about, students struggling to get through the so-called gateway courses. And so they wanted those courses to, they wanted to sort of focus on the pedagogy in those courses to better enable students to, be successful in completing them so that they could move on into different parts of their major that they were trying to get to. And so they put together a group and, said, here's a educational challenge that we would like you to fix. And it was the teaching center and some IT people, and there was a librarian at that group. But I think that what I recognized was that well, information literacy is often part of the solution, right, to many educational challenges. And so by sort of joining that group, but the thing they were working on was not, they wouldn't have said it was about information literacy, and no one identified using information as the specific need. But by having libraries participate in sort of building that program and building information literacy into it as we could, it did over a long period of time give us a lot of buy-in with faculty and administrators, on our campus, and it allowed other things to start happening. So that we were able to hold workshops for faculty, specifically about information literacy, for example, something that no one would have attended, and suddenly, because a lot of these faculty in this program knew who we were and what we were about, they were willing to come to those programs that were focused on information literacy, because they started to sort of, they recognized the value in what we were offering.
Jane, could I just jump in here really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
I think Clarence is making some really important points about doing a strategic analysis of where the significant conversations are happening to deploy resources and staffing in the best possible way. And so I'm reminded of some of my wide-ranging reading, investigation, faculty development. The two Swedish researchers, Roja and Martinson, wrote about what they call the backstage arena, and that is on campus life, where do librarians get involved and where can they most productively get involved? And that phrase to me resonates pretty powerfully. It's working not so much up front sometimes, but being stage managers are working behind the scenes to help the campus be successful. I'd also mention Patty Iannuzzi's influence on this front, because forming campus partnerships, she wrote about, she did it, she role modeled all of that. And I think there have been some really great examples out there. We just need more of them.
Great, wonderful. And there's some great conversations too going on in the chat about folks who are for credit courses, folks who are against credit courses. So some interesting discussion and debate going on there. So we're going to go back here to our presentation really quickly. In the interest of time, I think we're going to skip that next question. We're going to go to our last question and participation option here. So we'd love to hear, as you think about the future. So we've talked about the past, we've kind of talked about the present. As we think about the future of information literacy, we'd love to hear about how you feel about the future of information literacy. So we're going to do one more poll here. Let's see, hopefully this should be the right one. So which word best matches how you feel when you think about the future of information literacy? All right, so we'll go ahead and end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So hopefully folks are seeing the results, and we've got kind of a wide range of responses here. So it looks like the top vote getter is optimistic, also curious, but we also have a good chunk of folks that are uncertain or concerned, or maybe even a little bit discouraged going forward. So thank you all for sharing their responses there. So we'll ask our last question, sort of keeping these responses in mind. As our last question goes out to the panelists, what do you see as the future for information literacy? And I'm going to send it off to Clarence to get us started for that one.
Thanks, Jane. So someone in the chat just jumped around, said the future, Anne said the future, thank goodness there are such energetic young librarians who were children when all this started to keep the work moving forward. And I think I have to totally agree with that. I'm like I feel like I think I became a librarian when I was able to sort of, some of those folks who were really building this in the beginning were still around, and I felt very in awe of them. I remember meeting Patricia Sandbrevik. She gave a talk or something, and I was a library student, and I was so nervous that I couldn't really form a question for her. So I was very in awe of the sort of amazing passion and the people who went before and did all these great things. But I'm also so happy and excited about all the new things that are coming in the new directions, and all the energy and I guess again passion that people are putting into moving us forward. I wanted to say if Karen and I are very involved in this work of recognizing information literacy as a discipline, and I think that is a future that a few years ago I probably wouldn't have agreed with, but I have done a lot of work in thinking through, what is, for myself, what is this thing called information literacy that I've spent my time, teaching about and doing research around. And I think that, some Sheila Weber and Bill Johnson and others have written about this over the years. Actually, as early as 1999, they wrote an article sort of laying out the idea that information literacy was an emerging discipline, and they've written about it a few more times. And then in 2017, in the 10th anniversary of the Journal of Information Literacy, they again, outlined that they see it as a maturing discipline. And people here, like Bill Batke, who's I think an attendee here, has also done a lot of work around sort of outlining what it would look like to think of information literacy as a discipline. But the work Karen and I are doing, and it's really, I credit Karen because she called together a couple of years ago a group to start discussing this idea. But it was really kind of had a practical bent, which I think is kind of fits in with the talk that we're having today. At least my perception of it is, from my standpoint, it's sort of like, well, if it is a discipline, some people might say, who cares? But I guess for me, it's sort of, then what would change about the way we approach things? And would it change how institutions view, our work, or view, the goals of information literacy? And I mean, I think, we've gone to a lot of conferences and presented on this idea and gathered feedback about what people think about that. And I think there's still a mix of answers, right? People are not sure what difference, some people are not sure what difference it would make. Others are like, it's about time that we've had this conversation. I've been waiting for a really long time for this to come up, right? And, but I do think some of these questions we're talking about the best way to approach instruction, I'm not saying it would take a long time, right? And I think I see myself as just kind of trying to ignite the conversation within the field. And but I think it's a direction that we are heading anyway, and that we should, if we lean into it, I think we can have productive conversations about sort of what it is, but then also maybe, what it means for our practices and things like that. So, so I guess I will kind of leave it there, right? I mean, I think in the short term, it would mean that we have to have a lot of conversation and think through, like, what does this mean to us and what would we do with it? And in the long term, I think it could mean more resources and more recognition and kind of the things that we're talking about today.
Thanks, Clarence. Would anyone else like to jump in on that question? Where do we see the future? Go ahead, Symphony.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think in building off of the idea of disciplines, I think as far as like our sort of scholarship, the stuff that's sort of produced by librarians for librarians also needs to be transitioning to the work that we are doing in conversation with other disciplines. I think that our work needs to be co-created as a discipline with other disciplines to continue the legibility of the concept of the work, of perhaps even, maybe way in the future, the ability for folks to have credit bearing courses, I think those are all really important things that need to happen in conversation with other people doing work. I see on the internets all the time that somebody working in some other discipline has some big question that librarians can answer, or has some gripe that we know a lot about, and we need to be working more collaboratively with others. But other big futures or presents that we need to be working on. I think that the issue of race is and continues and will always be a really big topic of conversation in how we think about information, who has access, how it is disseminated, and that kind of thing. And there are major hurdles and blockages keeping those conversations from happening all across the country, and that does not mean we should stop. I think that's a really big topic. I think that as librarians, especially, I mean, I'm not old, but like I'm aging, but like we need to be making sure that we are prepared to talk about how information changes and how information is changing. I would assume that I have a lot of colleagues across the profession whose vocabulary around things like algorithms, around things like data brokerage, around things like the way that our publishers have changed into data brokers, are really making an impact on our information ecosystem. How can we teach a system that we do not understand the fundamental workings of, because capitalism is running it, changing it, and not exactly us? So I think that there's a lot of work that we need to be doing to constantly be preparing ourselves to be able to accurately assess our information ecosystem and how we see others coming into it. I think I could go along forever, but I think that those are big things that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about our instruction.
Thank you so much. So I know we're almost out of time. Karen, Nicole, Craig, a final word you would like to share?
Yeah, I would just mention a couple of opportunities. I think we need to be thinking even more creatively about how we can be involved with other groups or other, people in academia. For example, the adversarial collaboration project at Penn is looking at social science hypothesis testing to kind of deal with all the problems that have developed in the field of psychology with replication and reproducibility. And you can look at that site and see some of the interesting questions they're examining. And given what we know about all of the polarization, as people's information behavior, in the world that we're living in right now, we're having a challenging time understanding that. But there was recently, there's an initiative recently at Stanford called the Strengthening Democracy Challenge to do interventions to reduce polarization. And I would mention that there's not been any, I looked at their list of projects and there were no librarians involved. I'm just trying to do an environmental scan to see where we could productively be involved to deal with some of the epistemic problems that we are dealing with in this country.
Thank you, Craig. Karen and Nicole?
Yeah, I'll briefly say, and I'm glad Tawana brought it up in the chat, thinking about how this is being taught in LIS programs. And I've been an adjunct with the School of Information here since about 2015, teaching how to teach information literacy, and I try to incorporate into my class thinking about different models of instruction, critical information literacy, anti-racist pedagogy, some of the things that Symphony had brought up. But just, trying to teach students how to have the capacity to keep learning about these other factors that impact our work, while again, going back to burnout, not, feeling responsible for everything, and how to help students manage that. And I guess think more holistically about instruction, rather than these are the steps I take to do a one shot, and then this is how I track it for our, quantifying the amount of instruction that we do, and that's how I know I did a good job and I'm done. So yeah, just trying to expand that quite a bit, and I'll stop there.
Karen, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're out of time, so I'll keep this very brief. But I do just want to mention that in the US, we have this movement in K-12 by legislators to enact policy for our K-12 community to be required to be taught digital literacy or media literacy, which is that a sub-literacy of information literacy? I'm not sure. But either way, that means in the US, we have this movement towards a recognition of the importance of this for the K-12 community, which to me is encouraging. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you all so much. So I know that folks are heading out. You will be getting an email with some follow-up information. We're planning follow-up discussions. So probably 2 to 3 additional follow-up discussions. If you're interested in being a panelist on those, we have a poll here where a link here where you can let us know that you're interested in being a panelist. And then we would love to hear, as folks are heading out, any final takeaways that you all would like to share. We'd love to hear those in the chat. I want to thank again all of our panelists for being here today, for being willing to share their insight and their experience. I wish we had more time. We probably should have planned this for 90 minutes going forward, but hopefully next time we'll know for sure. But thank you all so much for being here today and participating.